Hi, everyone. This is Amy Major with Spirit Rescue Talk again. I have a wonderful guest here, Lisa Campion, with me today. Just want to tell you a little bit about her. She is an author of the #1 best-selling book, The Art of Psychic Reiki. Also, Energy Healer. She is a book of the energy healing for empaths and the awakening your psychic ability, which I know she wants to talk about today, and the upcoming Psychic Awakening Journal. She is a psychic counselor, Reiki master teacher, which we all need, with over 25 years experience. She's a master here. She specializes in training emerging psychics, empaths, and healers. And let me tell you, we really need that in this world today. More teachers, more guides, more mentors. Hello, Lisa. How are you doing today?
Well, I'm doing so good, Amy. Thanks for having me on your show.
Thank you for being here. It's awesome. Like I said, I really wanted to meet you. You've been on my friends list for quite a long time. We have very interesting, very similar journeys in the work that we do. Can you tell our viewers a little bit about you? How'd you get to where you are today?
Well, gosh, yeah, thanks. I was one of those like I see dead people kids, but I was born in the 60s and I grew up in the 70s and 80s, back when it really wasn't okay to talk about this. That was when there was no psychics on TV, no podcasts like this, no new age bookstores anywhere. Think about it, no internet. So I was really on my own, and I spent the first 20 years of my life trying to find the off switch, trying to find it off, trying to pretend to be normal in public, trying to figure out what the heck was going on with me. And my parents were hippies, which was really lucky. So I wasn't one of those psychic children that got dragged to the church and had holy water thrown on me, or got shipped off to the mental hospital. Like, that didn't happen to me. But my parents, they didn't know what to say. I was told I had a really good imagination. Oh, you and your imagination, you and your imaginary friends. And I just was seeing all kinds of things. I'm a visual psychic, so I was like seeing dead people. I grew up in a super haunted house, a big giant Victorian house just outside Boston. And, I don't know if the house was actually haunted or it was just because I was there that all the ghosts, came around. And when I was little, I called them the gray people. And that they would sit on the edge of my bed, and they seemed really sad. I would talk to them, and I would listen, and then they would feel better. And I wasn't afraid, but I didn't really know what was going on. And I had this kind of like life-changing moment. I had a few pretty incredible moments as a child, but a big one was when I snuck into the movies to see the movie Poltergeist. My parents said I couldn't go. I think I was 12. And there's the psychic, there's Zelda, the professional psychic. And I was like sitting in the movie theater, like, oh my God, you can do that. You can that's a thing you can do. And I was like, I'm gonna do that. And then that was the minute I decided I was going to work as a psychic. And then she tells a little bit of a paragraph about what a ghost is, why they get stuck, what do you got to do to cross them over? And I was like, oh my God, somebody knows something. Because I had gone to the library, I'd searched everything. And I was like, somebody knows something. And it started like my lifelong love affair with paranormal movies and ghost movies. And I started going to everyone I could find, trying to get an education, basically trying to figure out what was happening, because that was the 70s and 80s. And there really wasn't any conversation or any way to learn anything, So then I started working as a psychic actually when I was 19. It was 1989, 87, somewhere way back then. And that was the dawn of the new age. Like, the new age was really coming in, and I finally got training. I worked with a teacher, and I actually been working as a psychic since then. That it goes all the way back to that point. But I think it was an interesting way to grow up, in some ways really isolating, lonely, scary. And so I wrote the books I wanted to find in the library that I couldn't find. I created the classes that I wish I had had. I became the mentor that I really wanted. And I feel really passionately about helping other people go through this process of awakening. So many people are having their psychic experiences pop open, every generation seems to be way more psychic than the previous one. So kids are coming in more
Yeah.
psychic. Oh yeah, totally. I and I just feel really strongly about helping people go through that process in a more graceful and less painful way than I did. Any day I can help somebody not struggle and suffer and thrash around like I did is a really good day for me.
That's an amazing story to tell. I'm really interested about that, the haunted house too, because I now live in a big Victorian house in New England as well. But I grew up on the other side of the country. I grew up in Long Beach, California, in a in a ranch where there was like no one ever talked about paranormal. No one ever talked about ghosts, though we had lots of ghosts in the house, just like you had lots of ghosts in the house. But you, like you said, no one really talked about it. I remember going all the way to the year 2000, asking people about ghosts and spirits and how to help them transition. And all the mediums I connected to, they're like, oh, they don't exist. They're not real. Oh yeah, I had that a lot. And it's like, oh, this is delusional. It's just a residual imprint. They're not real. And they're still teaching that to this day. So
Really?
how can you determine between a residual energy, which all these mediums and all these teachers are teaching people because they call them ghosts, they call ghosts residual imprints. But how can you determine between a residual imprint and an actual spirit that's earthbound?
I feel like that sorry you went through that. I grew up in New England and I still live in New England. I'm in Rhode Island now.
Mm,
Um, and there it's just an old place, where there are a lot of spirits here in New England.
mm,
And so I think we have ghosts, but I actually have a story about that where I was called back in the 90s. I did house clearings. I don't know, I did it for about 10 years and I had no idea what I was doing. I made every mistake in the book. Nobody was doing it. This was way before there was any paranormal TV or ghost hunting TV. I was working as a psychic, and people would call me and say, "I think I've got a spirit in my house. What do I do?" And I'd be like, "I don't know. I'm gonna go. I want to go over there and figure it out." You know what I mean? And I did every mistake. I went alone. I got in so much trouble.
yep.
So much trouble. I had no idea. Wow. So I don't know how I lived through it. Honestly, I just probably could have died a bunch of times and stuff. It gets hairy when you do that kind of work. But one time I went over to this house and um, they said every Sunday at 4 o'clock, we hear these like the front door bang and we hear these footsteps up the stairs. We hear the sound of jingling change in the drawer. And then we hear this boom or this thump and the energy gets real heavy. And I knew it was a residual haunting for a couple of reasons. It happened every day at Sunday, every day at the same time. It was a spirit that didn't interact with the people there in any way. And those are really normal signs of a residual haunting, and it turned out that the person, like in the 40s, a gentleman lived there and he had committed suicide. He'd come home on a Sunday, walked up the stairs, put his change in his pocket, sat on his bed and put a gun in his mouth, boom. Right. And that when I went into the room, I was like, it still had the same like wallpaper on the walls, it still had the same like stuff. And I was like, wow, that like I wondered if there was still blood there because blood is really actually quite hard to clean out of things.
Right. Right.
So I knew there was, and I could see the imprint of this event, but I couldn't get the spirit to talk to me or interact with me in any way.
Right.
And that's how I knew it was a residual haunting. I was like, hello, and there was no response. So I think that the short answer to your question is, if you're getting intelligent answers, if you're getting response, if you ask questions and you're getting a response from it, then it's an actual ghost rather
Right.
than a
You know,
residual.
I know what you're talking about as far as going into these house clearings, going, I think I'm doing this right. I'm not sure. Am I messing up? Am I not messing up? And so that's one of the things that I teach now are the do's and don'ts of house
Mhm.
clearing, giving them a foundation, having them make it their own, transitioning into their style of house clearing, because everyone's different with the way that they do it, but giving them the solid foundation of how to stay out of trouble, how to stay safe,
Right.
making sure that you are actually completing a task that's in the betterment of the spirit, the homeowners, and you, and that you're not stirring up more things that could be there that haven't been awakened just yet. Because as a medium walks into a house, they wake up the energy. They could even wake up spirits that have been there that really haven't even been active in a place, but a medium walks in. It's like a wave of consciousness moving through the house. It wakes the spirits up quite a bit. So we need to be more mindful, more responsible, more professional in what we're doing with the house clearings. So I think you have valuable information. Anything that you want to give as tools, tips, tricks of the trade as far as house clearing?
I'm so glad you teach it. I would say it's not something for beginners, you know. And a lot of times what we see on the paranormal TV shows is quite dangerous, you know, and not good to do. Like they actually ghost busting is pretty boring. And that, you know, that doesn't work for TV. Like a lot of times not much happens or subtle things happen that don't look on camera, you know what I mean? So they come in with a lot of like these provoking you know, how to provoke spirits, or they sort of blunder around and you know, some of them are really mindful and beautiful and they're actually trying to help, and some of the others maybe not so much, you know. So I have like mixed feelings about paranormal ghost hunting TV. Like you can learn some really bad habits if you're just getting your education from that. So please don't do that. Please study with Amy and learn how to do it the right way, because you can. And I got so ill like one time, like I've had, you know, spirit follow me home. It moved into my house. It took forever to get rid of. It haunted my children. I want to say actually tormented my children for a while before I got rid of it. And then I was so super sick for a long time. And so that's because I had no idea what I was doing, you know. And back then nobody was talking about it. I mean, this was really in the 90s, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And so I would say get some training, number one. Make sure you have don't go alone, number two. Really make sure you have some good psychic self-defense, that you use some protections, that you have boundaries, that you are there, as you said, to help people, to help. Like ghosts are not animals. They're not like we treat them sometimes like they're in a, you know, zoo. And I have a little bit of a beef with like paranormal tourism, you know, because it's kind of like, let's buy a haunted house and then conduct ghosts tours
Oh,
there.
let's talk about that.
I'm like, how is that okay? Like, how is that like how this is a person, this is a human being, a
Right.
human person that probably is there because they were in very tragic circumstances. It's like not a good thing that there's a haunting there. They need help, you know, and the people who live there need help. So how can we enter into the situation with respect, with compassion, with kindness, and, you know, and not try to put ghosts like on display, like as if they're some kind of entertainment, you
Why don't
know?
we start with not making an event out of it and selling tickets and like it's a sideshow attraction?
Oh, it's really, I have such,
Ghost hunting and paranormal events have become big business.
yeah.
And unfortunately, by a lot of mediums that should know better, that should be more professional. And there's no protection for any of the people that are actually going into these events. How often do they sit? They say ground, shield, protect, clear, call in your team. They don't do any of that.
God forbid you try to move on the spirits.
Right.
But
No. Because they're
because
not allowed to
they're
move.
not allowed to move on the spirits.
Right.
You know, then what's the point of going to the Lizzie Borden house if there are no spirits there? You
There
know,
aren't any spirits there. I've already gone by. There's no spirits there. All residual energy. But the church across the street, oh boy, that had spirits. And I was like, oh, open.
churches always do, man. Churches.
They do. But I got beef with it too. I'm right there with you, you know, and I'm a little vocal about it. And I don't make best friends with a lot of the paranormal people because I do speak about the responsibility. I do speak about the respect.
Yeah,
The paranormal.
do really well. Like some of them, I feel handle it that way, and I have respect for those people. And some of them are just like trying to make good TV, and they're just thrashing around and crashing through, and you know, I don't know what.
Well, it's also not the people on the TV. It's not really their fault. I would blame it more on the producers. The people that are like, oh, do this, do that, and they're the ones actually creating the fakeness
Drama.
of the show, the drama, the sensationalism. It's people on the show, they don't have any control over that.
Right.
They don't like it as
A
well.
lot of them have good intentions or good hearts and they want to try and do the right thing, but it's the
Exactly.
people, like you said. Yeah.
I think mediums just have a different point of view than paranormal investigators because we actually build relationships with these spirits because
Mhm.
they are people. We build relationships, we have empathy towards them, we actually become counselors for them. So it becomes meaningful to us as mediums for earthbound spirits. But those that are in paranormal investigations that are not mediums, they're more for the investigative factor of it, understanding, trying to get more of the physical element of paranormal
Trying
activity.
to prove. Like I feel like often they don't quite believe, you know what I mean? Or they're trying to like they're just trying to get proof. Like, okay, we prove that there's a ghost in your house. Now we're leaving. And everything's worse because we did the provocation and we did all these, we brought in trigger objects and we did trigger sessions. And now we stirred everything up. We kicked the hornet's nest enough that we got some evidential proof and now we're leaving. Like that's what I have a beef with.
Well, the great thing is a lot of these teams are bringing mediums on now, but
Yes.
these
It's
mediums should
it's
be
a good one.
trained in rescue, I would think.
I
Spirit.
I would hope so too. I would hope so too. And I learned how to do it. So I was never formally trained as a medium. I was just one of those people that figured out how to do it. And that my training came from actually studying counselor. So when I become studying counseling, when I became a psychic when I was 19, I quickly realized I needed more training because I could deliver the message, and then my clients would cry. They'd have and I was like, you're crying.
Right.
Because I was 19. What do you know? And so I went back and I studied counseling and psychology, became a therapist because
Wow.
I really saw that I needed to have these deeper skills to help people. And I never, I always say for me, mediumship happens. I don't call myself a medium, but it happens when it needs to happen in the situations that I'm in. Um, and then I figured out like doing rescue is a lot like being a therapist.
Yes.
It's I say like ghosts are like, they're like my therapy clients, but they don't keep my office hours. So they, whatever we need to do to release, to help them process the traumas that are holding them here, or help them work through things, work through the fears that make them afraid to leave. It's so much like counseling. It's the same kind of skill in my mind.
It's the second action in rescue mediumship. We have communicate, counsel, guide. So
Right.
counsel is a huge part of
Mm.
rescue mediumship because not only are you counseling the spirits to go through all their attachments and go through their trauma, but then you're
Mm.
also counseling the homeowners.
Yeah.
You're teaching the homeowners and you're counseling anyone else that's involved in it, such as people that are mourning or
Mhm.
grieving the loss of whoever this spirit is. And of course, it's very difficult in a reading for a spirit to come through and they're earthbound. It's very difficult to give that information to maybe their loved ones that are waiting to find out if they're okay. Have you ever had that happen? And if it has, how did you handle it?
All the time. It happens all the time. And I feel like a lot of times the the crossing over maybe it's a process. Some people who die cross over right away. It's really clean. They just go. Other times it's a little bit of a process, like, and sometimes that process doesn't feel wrong to me. It just takes a minute. Like it's a huge shift in your beingness, in your state of consciousness, to be alive and then be dead. And sometimes it takes, the Buddhists say can take 30 days, 30 to 40 days to complete this process of fully, for some ghosts, for some people, and I don't think of them as ghosts. They're just still in process. So
Right.
sometimes that, like they want to show up and see who they want to show up at the funeral and see what happens. And, um, watching the end of their life, like there's a big learning for them, like how their death impacted people is a huge part of our life lesson and a huge part of understanding who we are and who we were. So I feel like some just hanging around is kind of finish that. And it doesn't feel wrong to me, it just feels like a process. And then of course some really are stuck and need help. And I find often that the loved ones sort of know. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
that's often not a horrible surprise. You know, I'll say, I don't think that this person is fully crossed over. Maybe they need a little help. Maybe they're a little stuck. And most of the time, my clients will be like, "Yeah, I thought that."
Mhm.
I hardly ever think it's a total shock or surprise.
Mm.
And then if it is, we just get curious and figure out what needs to happen.
Right.
Needs to be communicated. What was left unsaid. This is where mediumship is so incredibly healing for both people.
It is.
I found it happened a lot actually during the pandemic because people died quite suddenly. People died unexpectedly. People died alone, like they weren't allowed to have their family members in. People were put on life-saving equipment, which or life prolonging, like ventilators and things like that, which I feel like sometimes interrupts the natural process of death.
Right.
Like you're supposed to die, but you can't because your body's being, sustained by these machines, and so you kind of miss your exit off the highway. And they're like, like what? I feel like we should have people like you, Amy, in every single hospital. Just helping the people that can't
One
quite
day.
catch
One day.
up with what's happened to them. There would be such a blessing to just help people. But anyway, I feel like we have to kind of take it on a case by case basis and just stay compassionate, stay grounded, and sort of I always think it's a lot like being a detective,
Mm.
kind of, on see what unfolds and
Right.
what needs to be done, just like in a therapy session.
Well, a lot of clients come to me and they have that feeling that their loved ones are earthbound, but it's
Yeah.
only been maybe 2, 3 months after their transition. And we go into the teaching element of mediumship where we explain not all spirits transition at the same rate. Some of them are just late for everything. Like my son, he's late for everything. So I imagine his transition is going to take forever. So there's some people that are just going to take much longer, depending on what they're holding on to, what their attachments are, what their emotional state is. And my guides have personally told me that we don't really consider anyone earthbound until they've been in that earthbound state for over 6 months.
That makes sense.
So, and it's usually just a rule of thumb to kind of say generally it's about 6 months before we start really encouraging them to move on. Otherwise, they do form attachment to the earthbound state and they forget about the full transition and moving into the light. So they can get kind of lost along the way with all of the, oh, what's everyone doing down there? Are they talking about me? Oh, let me go to that birthday party real fast. And they forget they can do all that after they transition into the light.
Yeah, it's
And
cool.
another thing people ask me, which I want to get your take on, is suicides. There's a lot of people that have family members that have intentionally or unintentionally went into death through suicide. How do you handle that as far as letting them know if they're earthbound or not? And what's your take on whether they become earthbound or not?
So I think that's such an interesting question. Thank you for asking it. It's a great conversation. And I think what's so interesting is I get a lot of people who ask me, like, well, we're not sure how the person died. It was mysterious.
Mm.
They died under mysterious circumstances. And that to me is a really interesting, like, again, we got to become like a detective and figure it out. And I think again, suicide is such a case by case basis.
Mm.
I think there's a lot of reasons to suicide, and people who like consciously suicide because they're so like ill that they're ready to go, kind of like conscious medically induced suicide. I don't feel like they have any problem crossing over. I feel like the heroic suicides have no problem. You jump on the grenade to save your platoon. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
And that they just seem to die a hero's death. And, maybe they have trauma, war trauma, or maybe there's other things, but that suicide doesn't seem to hold them here. I think there are people who I always call it a soft suicide. The soft suicide, they like it's a drug overdose or an accident. They didn't like put the gun to their head or do it consciously, but I feel like their soul was like looking for an exit point, like,
Right.
or they're like unconsciously sort of seeking the a way out. And we just really have to like sort through there and see, well, what's unfinished, what sometimes there's a lot of regret, and they'll be like, I wish I could do that. I see them trying to get back in their own body. They're like, they're like, wait a second, time out, like, and those are the ones that really might have to process. I feel like often suicides go to sort of a halfway between place,
Mhm.
sort of like a holding place halfway between. I call it spiritual rehab. It's, to me, it looks like a rehab center. They
Mhm.
getting group therapy. They're getting like there's a lot of beings around them trying to help them process. And sometimes they recycle back down onto the planet really quickly. Like they'll be even try to be born back into the same family or back into the same situation, like really like, put me back in the game, coach. Like, I want to redo. And sometimes then they go up, they go back to heaven, back to soul world. I always called heaven soul world when I was little. Back to soul world, and they'll take sort of a longer time to kind of figure it out, like, and sometimes they do get stuck here. And that's tragic when they get stuck. They often get stuck in their death state, which is like that sort of like cycling through the trauma, of what happened over and over again. And then they really need help. So I think it just depends. Like, we have to take it on a case by case basis, but usually there's something we can do to support the process to bring healing to both that soul that's in transition and the family that's around them. And, it's a really tough one. I see it a lot with all the fentanyl deaths, with all the fentanyl poisoning. They don't even call it, overdose or suicide. It's just like these sudden accidental deaths people have, kids have, when you
Right.
buy a drug, it has fentanyl and you're dead. You know what I mean? And their souls were like, what? I just wanted to party. It was, there's so many. I just read the statistics in the news this morning, Amy, about the like fentanyl deaths, and
Wow.
it's ridiculously high.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And
Wow.
then sometimes I feel like often sometimes those souls are called into service to help other people, to help other, they pull some community service hours to,
They
to
do.
people in this who are in the similar situation, or I don't know if that I don't if it's to burn off some of the karma. I'm not sure why they really end up in those community service. I feel like it's a choice. It's
It
not a
is. Yeah,
punishment.
it is a
You know,
choice.
punishment. It's a choice to be of service, to help. That's my take on it anyway.
That's a wonderful take, actually. That was an amazing explanation of what really happens. And, for those that actually do die by their own hand intentionally, most of the time they don't become earthbound because, and I tell clients, they're choosing death over life.
Mhm.
Earthbound spirits are choosing life over death.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And I feel like sometimes it's the choice that's right for them, like it can feel like the right choice, like the end of life suicides, or even like the life is so pain. I feel like when they've had so much trauma and there's really no potential for healing, like they're not in a situation where they can get help healing, they can get therapy, or they can, if the trauma is so bad, it's kind of like, look, let me just hit the reset button.
Hmm.
Like, I'm gonna reset the game and start over again, because it can't somehow come out of the swamp of pain that they're in, and if there's no possibility for healing, then what happens is they can just start, especially this is true I think with addicts, is they start just racking up a lot of horrible karma. Like, things get worse, then they're
Right.
doing things that are not improving their situation but rather making it worse. And sometimes I feel like the soul itself will pull the plug on that incarnation, and that would be the soft suicide,
Right.
the accidental death, the overdose death, because it's like, all right, we're going to get you out of there. We don't want you to rack up a whole boatload of horrible karma that you're going to have to, work through in some other lifetimes. Let's just pull you out and get you some healing up in soul world or in the spiritual rehab, and reset you, into a lifetime that's going to be maybe more, give you a better start with less trauma in it.
I always say a lot of souls come to this planet with high ambitions. They want to just throw everything into their suitcase and say, I'm taking it with me. I'm going to clear up all this trauma, all this pain. Just give it to me all at once in this lifetime. And then they find out, oh my gosh, I can't handle this. This is too much for me. And they do end up in suicide because they're just brought way too much in with them.
Or sometimes random things happen. Like we only have so much control over what goes down here. There's the world is full of just random crazy things that happen and the results of our own choices. You know what I mean? Like that can rack up. And you might end up in a family and just get whammied as a child, like way more than was on your ticket.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
It happens a lot.
It happens a lot. And people think, I'm not a person that believes everything that happens to us is set in stone. I feel like some parameters are in place and, there's some things that are hard coded onto our ticket and a lot isn't. A lot is like random stuff that happens or the results of the choices. That why would we come here if everything was predetermined? We really are. I think the setup for Earth is to have, to be in a polarized, to have these choices. We have this or this, and we have free will and we have physicality that allows us to experience the results of our choices. Like that feels like where the learning is. And so if everything was predetermined, what would be the point? The point is to choose and experience, So we have more choice than maybe we think we do. And sometimes we just can't get out from under, under the difficulties that we find ourselves in.
I think that happens a lot. And I know another thing that some people claim and teach out there is that when the soul transitions into the light, they let go of all their pain. Everything is eliminated in the light. And I always question, I'm like, well, wait a minute. So why do we come in bringing all our previous pain in with us? Have you received any information, since you do believe in the transition and the reincarnation the same as I? What's your take on that?
I feel like, sometimes we have a shift in perspective when we die, that sometimes things lighten up. We can sort of see things in a new way. I've done a lot of sessions with family members who really couldn't have a good conversation with their relative until their relative was dead. You know what I mean? Like then there can be like a shift. I always say but if you were a total jerk in your life, you might be a jerk as a ghost. You know what I mean? Like dying doesn't always change our personality, especially for the earthbound ones can be really stuck in that. But I do think that some, we can sort of lift off a little bit of that stuff, or at least change our perspective. I don't think we get a whitewash, I don't think we get a totally, otherwise, why would we come back? I mean, I feel like to me, it seems like an evolutionary thing. So I see it as there's new souls, middle souls, and old souls. New souls come onto the planet, they're really rough around the edges. They're often extremely narcissistic. They're all about like accumulating power, sex, and money. It's kind of like Game of Thrones down here. And that's for them. And I feel like there's a heavy concentration of warrior fighter spirits on our planet, in our dimension. So, if you're a fighter, then it is like Game of Thrones. And that's actually quite fun for you, and you behave badly. You don't think about the consequences of your actions. There's low empathy, and so you rack up a lot of karma in your new soul days. I think it's quite fun, and you're not maybe the kindest person. Then you go into middle soul. Middle soul is a time when you choose to experience the results of what you've done. So let's say you were a slave owner in your new soul days, which is a very new soul thing to do. And you're like, I don't care, slaves. I'm in it for me, and then you go into middle soul time and you might choose to be a slave. If you were a slave owner, now you're a slave and you're like, wow, being a slave really sucks. It's terrible. And I'm like, it's not okay for anybody. And all of a sudden we learn compassion, we learn compassion by experiencing sort of the shoe on the other foot lifetime. and then we go into our old soul, and most of us are old soul, us, psychics, healers, empaths, we're old soul, and we are mostly about being of service. We have already high levels of compassion, and we come here mostly to serve. And I just find that, Amy, that's kind of a use for me. It's been a useful model because it helps me stay out of judgment, really. Like new soul people are like kindergartners. And, you know, okay, we don't, and then middle school's like 8th grade. Remember how much that sucked? 8th grade. You know what I mean? And then, we're in grad school, so we don't, I don't expect, I'm like, it just allows me to kind of like, yeah, like I understand where you are, and to be non-judgmental, because we've all been there. We were new soul. We were middle soul. Now we're old soul. So I'm like, okay, let's help, let's help instead of let's judge.
Right. And then one step above that, we have the transcendent soul that is out of school, that becomes the guides, the mentors, the spiritual leaders of the world. They are here to
they don't even come here anymore.
Right.
Like they may reach full ascension and they're out of the cycle of incarnation, and they are here to help us.
Right. Exactly. Well, you seem to do really well with teaching all these theories and fundamental aspects of the work that we do. Why don't we talk a little bit about the book that just came out, Awaken Your Psychic Ability?
Thanks. Yeah, it just came out. So I feel like my books are like my babies. I'm like, this one's my favorite. No, this one's my favorite. Like, but I'm really digging this book right now, and it is geared to help anyone. I feel like we all have psychic ability. It's sort of like musical ability, athletic ability, and we need to work it. There's sort of this myth that somehow you're just magically psychic and you never had to work on it, and that's not true. Like even if you have tons of musical ability, you don't just sit down at the piano and play like Mozart without working on it. So that's really the premise of the book, and it's like, what do we need to do to work on it, to practice, to learn things? You have to know some stuff, and you have to practice. You have to put some time and attention into it, and if you do you can open to your best potential, whatever that is. You can reach your potential. So I think it's a lot about understanding what that is, and then really taking some time to work that through, so you can practice your skills, practice your chops on the piano.
There you go. And I always say that, say you're born with a gift, but now you got to learn how to use it.
Right.
But not use it just for you, use it for the service of others. That's what I'm kind of stuck on.
Yeah, I think it's really good for both. Like, people often ask me, like, well, why should I do that? Like, what's the benefit of it? And I feel like it's a 50-50 proposition, Amy. Like, part of it is we, as we tap into our psychic ability, it can help us live a more soulful life. Right. Our guides and our higher self are always trying to help us live more to our potential. So, we just went through that hard time with the pandemic. We still got some hard times in front of us, I'm pretty sure. And I think we can use our intuition and our psychic ability to help us navigate really tricky worlds, really in our own life, and help other people. Like, I feel like it's 50-50. Like, there's really a lot of use for it for yourself, and you can use it to enhance whatever else you're doing that's in service with other people.
Well, so what's your plans for the future now that your book is out? What are we expecting to see from you?
So I have another book coming in November that's called the Psychic Awakening Journal. It's like a prompted journal, almost like more like a workbook that takes you through a lot of exercises. I think it's going to be a good companion for the book, Awakening Your Psychic Ability. And then I'm also working on an oracle card deck that I'm really excited about. It's unlike any deck that's ever been done, which I think that's kind of amazing right there, because everyone has an oracle deck, and there are so many, and they're all beautiful. Like, I love oracle decks, but this one's going to be a little bit unique, so I'm excited about that too.
Sounds like we have very similar things that we're doing. I am also working on workbooks and a school and a new oracle deck that has never been done before as well. So it'll be very interesting to share once they both come out. And
I can't wait to see what you're doing too.
Yeah. I'm just so grateful to have you on the show. And I know a lot of people learned a lot from this conversation. And I'm pretty sure a lot of people are going to want to reach out to you. How can people reach out and connect?
So coming to my website is really the best, lisacampion.com. And I have a lot of free resources for psychics, healers, and empaths there. I have all kinds of psychic development classes from beginner, intermediate, and even a year-long training program and apprentice program for people that want to go pro. If you want to become a professional, I got you there. Also have Reiki classes there. I have a great YouTube channel with a lot of free stuff available. And yeah, and you can find my books anywhere on Amazon or check your local booksellers. We always want to support the local bookseller people, but stop by my website and leave me a message because I'd love to hear from you.
Thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing your amazing knowledge and wisdom and experiences that I think so many people are going to gain a lot of insight from. It was a magical experience having you on today.
Thank you so much, Amy. Your beautiful show and your generosity and just sharing your gifts with the world too. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. I'm always here. And thank you to all of you for watching today.